Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Burt.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. Today we're going to begin by taking you back to the summer of 2014. And to get you in the mood, I'm going to play a short clip.
3, 2, 1.
The unmistakable sound of the Ice Bucket Challenge, a craze that involved buckets of ice or icy water being voluntarily thrown over people's heads. It started in the US, but was soon swamping Facebook feeds around the world. Many people initially did the challenge in support of the ALS Association, a US organisation that supports people with motor neuron disease. But by the August bank holiday of 2014, it had reached the UK. And given the focus of the challenge initially on ALS, all eyes suddenly were on the MND Association. But what did that mean for the UK charity that was suddenly thrown into the limelight?
Well, we're joined today by the Chief Executive of the MND Association, Tanya Curry. Before joining the charity in 2023, she held several interim roles and before that was Chief Executive of St Clair Hospice. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, good morning.
Now, you weren't at the MND Association in the days of the Ice Bucket Challenge, but it did mark a significant turning point for your organisation. So tell us, where was the MND Association at 12 years ago?
I can't believe that was 2014. Some minutes it feels like 5 minutes ago, and then we think, gosh, it was ages. The organisation was a fairly small, actually, national charity. The Ice Bucket Challenge gave us a boost of about £7 million. That happened pretty much overnight. And everyone thinks it's their gift to get £7 million overnight, but it can actually be a real challenge to think about how you want to spend that money and do it really well. Plus the profile of the association and MND in general really went up during that time. So from all my looking back and speaking with lots of staff who were still actually in the organisation from that time, it felt that it was just a great pivotal moment. But I think behind the scenes there must have been some very challenging, interesting conversations.
And do you think it's fair to say that the charity perhaps wasn't ready for this huge amount of exposure?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair comment. I'm not sure that any charity really is ready for that level of exposure, and I've worked in a few now. And when things change almost overnight for you, you've never got a strategy in place that goes, if we have an injection of 10 million, this is what we'll do. Or actually, maybe I've never had a strategy in place. Maybe that's saying a lot. But we don't know, because we're often focusing on the here, the now, how we're supporting those beneficiaries. And we daren't dream that we might get such an injection to make even more of a difference. So no, they weren't ready. I can imagine that was a huge challenge to navigate.
And so what was that internal impact as this suddenly accelerated for the organisation? You say you've spoken to people who were there at the time, who are still on the team. What was happening on the fundraising side of things? How were people having to, I suppose, scale at pace in order to manage this enormous injection of cash?
In all honesty, I think people were a little bit in awe that this had happened, that it had created the profile. I think there was a general sense of head down, just get through the work, manage supporters. Stewardship was excellent. I have to say that is one thing we do really well in terms of our supporters. So our fundraising team will have had brilliant relationships with people that were making quite a lot of money, regular donations then for us. And we just need to make sure everyone's very happy with what we're doing. We need to make sure we've got plans with people in our research team and our services team to spend the money well. But I think it's a bit of a hamster wheel moment, and you're just running to keep that wheel going. And not many people in those moments go, hold on a minute, we just need to get off the wheel. We need to breathe. We need to plan what we're really going to do. So I think it was just a lot of energy, lots of enthusiasm, but probably not a moment to look at where's the bigger picture here.
And how did the charity respond from an operational side in terms of thinking, how are we going to spend this money? Did the size or the headcount increase significantly quickly?
It was a growth, definitely, for the organisation, but probably not to the scale that it could have and should have been. And I think there was a general caution, quite rightly, of is this a one-hit wonder for MND? Are we making lots of money overnight and then we have no idea how we're actually going to sustain that income? So I think, to be fair to anyone in that situation, you have to start thinking about sustainability and also just thinking, how do we grow the brand? How do we grow the recognition on the back of this? But not many organisations do that. You're just quick to respond to the here and now. So headcount grew a bit. Income obviously grew, but then dropped again in the following years. So it was quite a boost, but didn't actually sustain for the organisation.
And so as you moved through that big spike in income and then the decline, which you would expect, of course. From having a big injection of cash like that, how did the charity then manage taking a step back again from that coalface and moving from that position, I suppose, of managing and facilitating this large amount of money coming in to transitioning to a place of thinking, well, what is the bigger picture? What is the long-term story here?
It's quite hard for me to kind of articulate some of that because I wasn't the chief exec doing a lot of that leadership, and our board have changed and our senior team have changed. But I think there was a real sense of we've got an opportunity to do a bit more in our research space, to do a bit more in our care space, but actually probably not as much thinking about how do we leverage the profile of MND, how do we leverage the brand here, how do we talk about the MND Association being a national charity and the difference that can make. Often it's about the here and now. Can we put more nurses in this area? Can we do a bit more research in this area of the country? It's not often the case where people will sit and think, actually, if we need to write a strategy again for the next 5 years based on income growth, profile growth, what does that look like?
And you mentioned that stewardship is a real strength of your fundraising team. I wonder how that was managed and perhaps lessons that have been learnt from that time, where you've got a lot of people looking at the organisation and feeling that there's some pressure on let's demonstrate that we are doing fantastic things with this money. How was that approached?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the most recent example we've got is the profile of the organisation after the diagnosis of Rob Burrow. And that was 2019 when Rob had his diagnosis. And actually the profile of our organisation has just shot up like nothing anyone would ever imagine experiencing. I think we always think about the people with MND, what do they need from us? What do they need to see? What do they need to feel from our organisation? And stewardship for me is all about great relationships with people. You know, let's be honest, let's have some good touch points with people. Let's build supporter journeys so we know how we take people with us as an organisation or not. You know, some people choose to give a one-off donation because they wanted to do a thing, and that's absolutely fine as well. But whatever they do for the organisation, you want them to have left with a really nice taste of what we mean as a charity, what our culture is, and actually how we want to work with people. So I think we've learned a lot along the way, and we're really trying to scale up. But actually, we're not losing the heart of every supporter is an individual. Every supporter has got a story. And actually, I was only with some of my team yesterday in the fundraising side of the organisation, and they really give people time. And they treat them as individuals. And I think that's really hard to do when you've got thousands and thousands of donors. But we seem to be getting it right.
I think Kevin Sinfield's fundraising efforts and the awareness that was brought, as you say, by Rob Burrow did so much to bring understanding of MND into the mainstream public awareness. And you said there that you've seen some organisational culture changes which have been happening around this time as well. How have you moved to develop your organisational culture and maybe people who've been in the organisation for a long time in reflection of the fact that this is becoming something that people are now much more aware of these days, albeit I'm sure we still have a lot to learn?
Yes, yeah, we always have a lot to learn, don't we? It's an interesting journey, to be fair, and I think we are still a growing and developing organisation. We will talk a lot internally at our exec team about We're trying to build the plane and fly it at the same time, which can be a real challenge, actually. There are lots of things when I joined behind the scenes that just weren't in place and weren't fixed and weren't fit for purpose. And actually, we had a big job to do in right-sizing the organisation, not just in terms of people resource to actually meet the demands of this raised profile, which is fabulous. We talk about it being a nice problem to have, but actually the systems and the processes and the thinking that goes around that. We are not a small £5 million charity that was developed in Northampton anymore. That was wonderful. That was our roots. But look at what we're doing now, with income sitting around 48 million and over 300 staff. Actually, how you work when you're much smaller with a smaller, staff base and volunteer base is very different to where we are now. We have really tried to keep people with MND front and centre of what we want to do and why we need to change and why we need to get more efficient. And I think every organisation sometimes needs a little bit of a refresh, doesn't it? We go on cycles as organisations, and I think that's what we've been trying to do, in all honesty. When I joined in 2023, I tried to spend a lot of time listening to people, whether it's staff, volunteers, our community. And I heard some great things about the charity, brilliant stuff about how caring and supportive and lovely we were. One of the things I was repeatedly hearing was how slow we were. And someone talked to me about us being a big friendly dinosaur. And that's lovely. That's a lovely image. But actually, when you're working with people where 50% of those diagnosed with MND will die within 2 years, they have not got time for us to be slow or ploddy or procrastinate on things. We have to make our decisions with speed, but with accuracy. And we have to match the MND community with their speed of kind of diagnosis and the need for things to change. And we weren't doing that. So we're trying to now, not without its growing pains though.
But that must feel a little bit like the hamster wheel that you mentioned earlier, associated with the ice bucket challenge of we've got to be moving, we've got to be showing progress, we've got to be keeping up with the terribly fast trajectory of this disease and making sure that we're addressing it. How do you take a step back, take a breath as an organisation, whilst also demonstrating on the outside, and I guess to a certain extent on the inside as well, that you are sustaining the momentum?
Yeah, we're not brilliant at this. We have not nailed this at all, but we are making some progress. So when I joined, there was no strategy, there was no business plan, there was no sense of prioritisation. Everything was urgent, everything was important. Everyone wanted to do what they wanted on their list for the whole organisation. It was very, very silo driven. We are not like that now. We still have pockets, but actually I have to remind myself some days when I sit in meetings and I hear the joy of, the communications team have been in conversation with the fundraising team and they've hatched a plan together. It sounds so simple, but it was just never happening. We have moments at ELT where we really have to prioritise what we're working on, and we are not always great at, disagreeing and coming out with an outcome that works for the organisation. I think we're still doing too much, but it's on the backdrop of it all needs to be done. We are much better now at business planning, talking about what our 3 or our 5 priorities for the year are that we need everyone to get behind. If they do nothing else, they're the 5 things we have to deliver. And actually other things then have to come slower and lower down on the list. It's not easy. It's really not easy because everyone in my organisation is totally cause driven. They want to do the best for the community, but we have to remind people sometimes that we've said yes to everything for so many years, and that's how it puts us in a situation where we've got too many projects, too many work streams going on, and then people can't sustain them, and then people get frustrated because they're not delivering as they want to be for the community. So I think really thinking about that question, we're trying to build this culture where you can have great communication, you can be really honest with each other, you can say, I can't do that, or if I do that, I can't do this. We want to build that where we've got teams that will speak up, but will also help with finding the solutions. It sometimes feels like it's always a management problem, doesn't it, these challenges? But actually, I know from talking to my team yesterday, who I met for lunch, there are so many things that I learned that were happening on the ground that just never ever would have touched my radar. And actually that makes me think in a different way. So when I go into my next leadership team tomorrow, I can be thinking, I've learned something different for what's actually happening at grassroots. And that sometimes can feel very different to when we've got our heads in strategy and prioritisation.
Would you be able to share an example of that?
Well, we have 84 branches and groups across our organisation that are volunteer powered, really committed volunteers. But actually, some of the things I was hearing yesterday were some very clear examples about how our culture isn't quite working as one team. So one of our values is one strong team. And we're really, really trying to live by that. They're a new set of values, so we're really bringing them to life. But actually, I was hearing about some very difficult conversations that were taking place where volunteers and staff members don't agree, where staff members feel that they don't have a voice and they don't actually have some level of influence over what's happening in some of the areas across the 3 nations that we cover. And that led on to a conversation about how are we really supporting people to have some of those really hard conversations with volunteers? How are we really connecting as one strong team, and are we putting enough time, energy and support in the right way to our staff on the ground to be able to do that? And I think that's really hard. So I was presented with a whole list of things that need to be addressed and a conversation that kind of went, but we're not quite doing that until the strategy's sorted out. And I'm sitting there thinking, some of the things that I'm hearing just don't feel right, and they don't feel like they're in line with our culture. And if we've got volunteers out on the ground and staff out on the ground that actually in the bottom here are struggling to make good decisions, we as an organisation have a responsibility to help with some of that leadership and navigation. And it led me feeling actually as leaders we probably need to be a bit more present in some of these community settings than we are now. Now, that's not in the plan. That's not in the plan until next year. But for me, that feels like it's going to be a big shift that we have to make towards the back end of this year to try and help people move forward in a different way. Because again, it's all about relationships and getting this right.
That volunteer piece, I think, is particularly interesting because, of course, as a leader of an organisation with, as you say, 300 members of staff now, you can, of course, set cultural strategy, you can set organisational policies, and there is a give and a take when you have staff and you have people who are employed in your organisation. And that is, I think, something which is in many ways very easy to start the ball rolling on. When you have volunteers who, of course, are giving their time, giving their energy because they care about the cause and because they want to do something good, but are not contractually obliged to your organisation, are there any differences in the ways that you have to navigate that sort of approach to those volunteer groups? And do you have to have slightly different conversations with them? Or is it trying to take a blanket approach to everyone as part of that one team objective?
I think it's a mix of both. There will always be things I feel as an organisation we are going to say everyone has to do this. There are some red lines about how we behave, how we govern things, how the finances are managed. There's processes that we all have to adhere to, and that's actually how it is. We haven't been great at kind of really setting that out very clearly. So actually you often have a volunteer cohort that are so passionate and are doing everything that they feel is right and good and proper for the MND community. And lots of them have been doing it for years and years. So when you're coming along saying actually some things have changed or regulation has changed, that needs a little bit of explaining. It needs some time. It needs a bit of engagement. And actually, I think we're doing some really good work now to try and bring some of our volunteers who are in more of a leadership role with the branches and groups together, so we can have this grown-up dialogue to talk about how it's feeling from our side, how it's feeling from a volunteer's perspective, and actually some of the things that just need to change. How are we best placed to do that together? So I think we're having more of these kind of grown-up, open, honest conversations. The challenge I think we all have when we work with such big volunteer numbers, there are thousands and thousands of volunteers, and how do you influence and meet everyone? And I do sometimes think that's about boots on the ground and us getting out. We have a lovely kind of regional model where we've got community staff, whether that's on the services side, so actually supporting people with MND, or fundraising, or campaigning. So we've got lots of our own staff, actually making sure they are equipped to have the conversations, they are keeping volunteers up to date. No one wants surprises, do they? Everyone wants to know what's going on. And it's that balance between making sure we communicate enough, not too much, so we're not bombarding people, but also trying to give an absolute certainty about the door is always open. We are here. Come and talk to us. And we don't have to do that all the time in an office, in person. We can pick up the phone. And sometimes I think we've lost the art of sometimes having those conversations. So we're trying to instill more of that. But yes, hard going at times, but we've had some lovely, lovely examples of where that's starting to work. And it was only last week I saw a beautiful note written from a new volunteer to say how welcome she was, how privileged she feels to be able to do the role, how the induction was fabulous, how the staff team have been great. And it's those moments that I think we have to hold on to and go, we are actually starting to make a difference, which is great.
So you have thousands of volunteers?
Thousands, yes. This is one of the challenges in the organisation. We don't always have a single point of truth for the data, but we have probably got over 10,000 volunteers in a variety of roles, whether that's through the branch and group networks, whether that's fundraising volunteers, whether it's volunteers who actually directly support people with MND as an association visitor, which is like a befriending role. We just have so many of them, but actually every single person is passionate. They are normally here because they have a direct connection with the cause, so they at first hand have experienced what it's like to be with someone who has MND. And actually we have so much gratitude for those volunteers. We could not absolutely deliver our organisation without them, so they're such a credible part of our workforce, and we really are working to be one strong team because that's what feels like it's going to make the difference.
And how are you finding volunteer recruitment and retention at the moment? I feel I have to ask this question because there seem to be two very contrasting narratives.
Yes.
Of it's really hard, they're dropping off, they don't want to be doing set hours, it needs to be a more flexible offering, whereas others saying, I've never seen it more vibrant and thriving.
Yeah, we've got quite an interesting challenge at the moment. We have lots of volunteers who have been with us a long, long time. I think some of the challenge will be when things start to change in terms of how we want the volunteering model, that will be led by what people with MND want and need. So when some of that starts to shift, it will be interesting to see whether we have a drop in our retention. At the moment, we have a very high retention rate, actually, and a pretty high satisfaction rate. Our volunteer survey was good reading. I mean, it's not superb in every angle, but we are really trying to now lean into, we definitely need a different demographic coming through and sharing some of the load with the volunteers. And that means that we have to remodel some of the things we want to do. Not everyone wants to now be the chair of a branch. They don't want to take a treasurer role. They don't want to be a secretary. They don't float people's boats because they haven't often got time, if you're trying to get a younger demographic who's maybe working, to come and join your organisation. So they are going to give us some quite interesting discussions. I have a sense we've got lots of volunteers that also think that model needs to change, having been in it for a long time. People have taken roles and are in them for years and years and years. That's not healthy, and it's not good for them. And it really isn't great for the organisation on the longevity of that. How do we sustain that? So we haven't had huge problems. We are recruiting. We are trying to recruit different and do that really well. I think part of the challenge is, how do you blend some of the traditional with the new? I think that's where we're going to get the quite interesting challenge.
And of course, you've been in post for 3 years. You are part of the new for
I
this
know.
organisation.
Yes.
And you've been, as we've heard, implementing some really ambitious strategic changes in an organisation that maybe hasn't seen that much change in its lifetime. How has that personally been for you, coming in as this new injection of energy?
I am loving it. I am really pacey, so I'm very aware of that, and I have to keep myself in check. I love variety. I love a challenge. I get both every single day, which is great. And I think coming from the interim world, which was a purposeful decision for me, actually, I really had to talk to myself about take your time, listen, don't change everything overnight, go slowly. My chair was always talking to me about marathons and sprints, and we need to get a race pace here, Tanya. And I'm probably not very good at that, but I try my best. I was met with an organisation that actually was desperate for some change and desperate for someone to put some new eyes and some energy into some of the work. And I heard that only recently. And that was lovely to hear, actually, because I tried to keep a bit of a lid on it, but you can't really change who you are, can you? That's kind of who I am. But I've loved it, and I'm still loving it, and there's still lots to do. But I am so driven by the community of people that we're actually here to support. It is the cruelest of diseases. It never fails to stop me in my tracks when I spend time with people. And it's those moments that really remind you of, this is why I'm pushing so hard. This is why we need difference, because I can see the change and what that will bring to our community. And it feels exciting and it feels possible. But we also just can't be an organisation that stands still for 10 years and isn't on the front foot. We have to be a step ahead in this game. And I stand by that. And I know it's high energy, but I think it's the right thing.
And going back to 2014 and this pivotal moment, turning point for the charity that came thanks to the Ice Bucket Challenge, for you coming in 9 years after that summer, almost 9 years, and then now again 3 years on, is there anything that the charity has taken from that moment where you still see it in evidence today?
I think there's lots. I think the charity learnt what it was like to have its profile raised. It learnt that that comes with opportunity, but it really does come with scrutiny and challenge. And I think we live that every day now. And we can go back to that moment in 2014 and go, it happened then. It's still happening now. So I think there was so much we learned along the way. You can't always do things on a shoestring. I'm always focusing on how can we be lean, how can we be efficient. But actually, we can't run a £48 million charity on 100 staff. That was never going to be sustainable. And I'm not saying that's what they did, but we really had to kind of invest in our people. And it's our people that are going to make this right for the future. There is so much opportunity. There is so much profile on us at the moment, which comes with questions, comes with scrutiny, comes with holding us to account on some of those decisions. But I think that's really good because we are fundamentally driven by our cause. And I think if you can hold on to that bit and remind yourself every day the people you're actually working for and why you get up in the morning, that's what I use as my decision-making tool. Not very technical, but if I can sleep at night because I know that fundamentally I've made the right decision for people with MND, then that's a good thing.
And as you said about both the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge and about Kevin Sinfield's amazing fundraising efforts for the MND Association, you never know when this might happen for your organisation. Do you have any other advice for other charities who might unexpectedly find themselves in the spotlight with little time to prepare a very detailed response strategy?
If I had some time again and I was right in the middle of it, I would remind people just to take a moment, like really step back, doesn't have to be for long, but with your team, with your board, and talk about where are we going? Like, let's just breathe and get the plan together. Not many people will have these moments in their strategy. Not many people will have a plan for it. But it comes down to great communication, great financial planning, really transparent decision making, and actually don't try to be all things to all people. If you need some time and you need to work it out with your team, be honest about that. Communicate. I am sure supporters would rather you take a bit of time and work out how you're going to invest that money well and with solidity than you just make a load of stuff up and just put money in different buckets of work that really aren't going to make a difference to the ultimate end game here. When everyone's running at 100 miles an hour, I do think it's our job as leaders to go, whoa, let's just step back 2 minutes. We need a bit of time as a team, and then we go again. Not easy to do, but actually it pays dividends.
But then without being accused of being the slow, friendly dinosaur that you were before.
Absolutely. I'm not talking about take 5 years to do it. I'm talking about give yourself a few weeks. It happens, doesn't it? There are these moments where charities will change significantly almost overnight. And the demands from your supporters and for the public are, well, what are you doing with that money? How are you going to spend it? How are you going to show us the difference? We all want to do that, and we absolutely can do that well, but you can't do that without a plan. And putting a plan together takes a little bit of time. I'm thinking weeks. You get your comms together, you get your plan together, and then you work out how you're going to deliver that, and then how you're going to keep communicating with people what you're doing with that raise profile, raise money, more support.
And on the subject of a longer term plan, you have hinted over the course of this discussion on some changes around the corner for the charity, not least in volunteering, but other areas as well. Are there any big changes that we should be expecting that you can tell us about?
Yeah, not big changes, to be fair. I think there are more research opportunities coming down the line, actually, and for the first time we are starting to see treatment options for people with MND. That's wonderful. How exciting to be in an organisation that is going to be a big part of that. I think there will be challenges for us with the NHS and decision making, regulatory approval for medicines, how we need to work differently as an organisation to play a part in the decision influencing for those sorts of situations. And how are we going to be working in the community with the community to support people with MND? People want community home-based care. We are an organisation that can mobilise very well. So I think more of what we're doing, I think there's definitely some efficiencies that we need to create in the organisation so we actually spend our resource really well. It goes back to the decision making. You want to make sure every pound every supporter gives you is absolutely going in the right direction for the cause. So nothing massive, but a bit of refinement, I think.
Well, Tanya, it's been such a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for a really interesting discussion.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Tanya, and that's it for this episode. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producers for this episode are Nav Powell and Jude Owen.